Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Nadia Lali. I'm the director of the Center for Middle East Studies here at Brown, where I'm also professor of anthropology and Middle East Studies. It's my great pleasure to host today's event. I'll be in conversation with Khalid Abdel-Hadi to talk about establishing Jordan's first online LGBTQ magazine, My.Kali. So today's event is co-sponsored by and supported by the Herbert H. Goldberger Lectureship Fund. It's part of the Queering the Middle East and its Diaspora series. It's also co-sponsored by the Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women and the LGBTQIA+ Thinking Initiative. So, excuse me, I'd like to welcome Khalid Abdel-Hadi. Hello, Khalid. Thanks for joining us. Let me just introduce you to our audience. So Jordanian Palestinian Khalid Abdel-Hadi is a visual artist, activist, and founder of My.Kali magazine, a MENA-region conceptual, queer, feminist, intersectional webzine launched in 2007. Khalid has graduated from several regional and international programs, including the Swedish Institute's Young Leaders Visitors Program in 2014. He took part in the Human Rights Watch No Longer Alone campaign and was listed on Guardian's LGBT Change Heroes of 2017. And he has been featured by many artists, journalists, and documentaries internationally. Currently, Khalid is editor-in-chief and creative director of My.Kali, and is working to raise awareness and visibility, towards the issues and victories of the regional queer and feminist community. I'm so happy that you can join us today. So just, hello.
Hi.
Hi. So just
Thank you for having me.
Just to tell everyone about the structure of the event. So I'll be in conversation with Khalid for a while, and then if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A function, and we'll have time for that later on. So Khalid, you founded My.Kali magazine, I think when you were 17. So can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances that led you to the decision? How did you go about it? How did it happen? And what did you do to actually make it happen?
Absolutely. I believe even like the preparation for the publication was even more earlier. As an individual, I'm fascinated by publications, general magazines. I like the design aspect of publication, the storytelling, how it's more related, connected to time, and you know, the time being, it's like almost like time capsules that are very much up to date with our current society. The publication happened like as a very natural process, or as a very natural need, when I was personally looking for a place to express and to journal. I was approaching many local publications here in Jordan, but I found all sorts of ostracization, whether I was like very young and I couldn't write about the issues that I wanted to write about. I felt rejected the whole time. And I believe it was a very natural call. I was fed up with all this rejection, and I told myself I will just like open a blog in the form of a publication, and I will very much connected to the idea of a publication. So issue number, a theme, a photo spread, opinion pieces. Of course, it started as a team of one, myself and me journaling the whole time about my experience as a queer person in Jordan. And then it progressed to an amazing team and also outsourcing with our community in the region. So It did happen that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of want to find out more about this whole process of how, you know, it changed, transformed over the years. But I guess, you know, I mean, the first reaction would be, so how was it first received when you, you know, came out with the magazine?
I believe the way it came out, it was in a very formalized way. You know, the titles like the first perverted publication in Jordan, the first LGBT publication in the Middle East. alone in the process. I didn't know how to cope with all of these titles. But just like a sidebar, My.Kali was not the first publication in the region, or let alone being the first in Jordan. But it was a very heavy on a very young person at the time who was facing all of this, formality. And I remember how it was misused, and how it was how all of this coverage over the publication was used by people who wanted to, people who are getting into elections, and how they were using it as a propaganda to push for their campaigns and all of that. But we were received, I remember we were receiving a lot of, reflecting with you now, we were receiving a lot of letters from the local community, because they were excited for something that is, like a platform. So I felt like there was a lot of engagement, and that's how the publication progressed. And usually I like to say that the magazine was launched by conservative and extremists who actually helped in launching this queer feminist intersectional publication, and actually having that free publicity at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's of course one way to look at it, and I guess you can do that now and you laugh, but I assume that at the time it must have been really stressful and hard and challenging, especially you were still quite young, no?
Yeah, it was very stressful. When you're younger, you don't think of consequences. I mean, I was not thinking of the consequences of it. It was just like a need, and I felt like I acted based on that need. I felt I was really not desperate to publish. I really wanted to write, and I don't consider myself a writer, not like compared to the other amazing writers, but I felt like I really wanted to publish in the local media. And I remember I approached this magazine, and I remember I was like checking what the topics they write about to get published. And I remember I realized that it's a very woman-centric publication. So I remember I wrote an article about how women can get over divorce at the age of 16. And I remember the editor invited me, who was a woman. And she told me, she asked me a question. She was like, what does a 16-year-old boy can tell a woman about how to deal with divorce? And I was like telling her, I don't actually know anything about divorce, but it tells you, I was trying to connect at the time with how women would face such a situation.
Wow, that is so interesting. Yeah. And I mean, did you have people to talk about? I mean, did you have friends you could share this with, family, or this was all going on in your head?
I did not have a team. I did not have a team around me who I was like co-directing. The publication did not start with a certain structure. We did not have a plan for it, or structure, or even how we're gonna map it through. And I remember it was just like a lot of the articles and the content was based on conversations we were having in the community, and we would commission volunteers, not commissioning a payment at the time, and we were commissioning people to write about the topics that the queer community was discussing. Of course, you would have friends who would advise you, but I remember a lot of people stayed away from me because it was, as an individual, even with friendships, they were very hesitant to be around me because there was a stigma about the publication and anything around the publication. This was funny. Reflecting now, it followed me through the years of people who are not very public about their orientation or their identity. They prefer not to be associated with someone or even a publication that is very public about what it talks about.
Yeah. Speaking about public, so I'm wondering how, if at all, is the creation of Maikali linked to the development of LGBTQ organizations in the region? I mean, did you at some point, after you started the magazine, become aware of organizations? Were you approached, and how is the magazine kind of linked to that development in any way?
I don't think the publication is linked to any development of any organization in the region, unless there's something happened and we don't know about. But we are very far from that formalization or that kind of entity. But the connection is, we were often we would have our network, or many organizations in our network specifically, and with the way we would use this network whenever we are approached, because we are a very public entity or a very public domain. So we are approached by many people who are, whether women or LGBT individuals who are facing some sort of danger. They would send us for either legal advice, or if they're a refugee or asylum seeker, or they're seeking some kind of guidance. I believe that's the way we were using our network, or the organizations, whoever we are, we're in touch with, and we feel like we would direct them to the right places to have these conversations, because we are not, I don't think that's part of our expertise. And I felt telling individuals in danger that was morally unsettling, and I felt the best way to handle it as a team is to redirect them, not to shun them away. And I felt like that's how we were using the network. So I think that's how I would link our connection to organizations.
Yeah. I want to come back a little bit to that topic, maybe from a different angle. But I mean, you know, when you sort of speak about Maikali, or at least, I don't know if you speak about it, but the way that I've seen you talk about in interviews, but also, you know, the way that I guess it's written about, stress that it's Jordanian, it's a Jordanian magazine, or it's at least it's Jordanian based, right? But at the same time, because it's an online magazine, clearly it's much more widely read. I mean, not just within the region, but also in the diaspora. So I guess one first question in sort of in that kind of framework is, so what is unique about Jordan in this context, and what is more general, or what are some of the more common issues with the region?
Yeah. I agree with you. Many people like to pin the publication to Jordan because it was birthed in Jordan. And I believe people, it's difficult to detach from a country you're birthed from, I guess. But it's not Jordanian at all. It's a very regional publication. The publication tried to remove borders, not create them, in many ways within the you know, the topics or whatever we work with. Many of the team or the core team are from all around the region, from Egypt, Iraq, and even living in the diaspora abroad. When it comes to communality, I believe Jordan is like many countries, but sometimes it's very difficult to compare the capital, like within the same country, to compare the capital with other cities. It's very different from one place to another in the same, from the same country, let alone like comparing Jordan to other countries. But the thing that brings us closer to other countries is how authorities and governments use morality laws to target minorities, specifically the LGBT community. Jordan is not as extreme, like, to be fair, is not as extreme as other authorities or governments in the region, not like Iraq or Egypt, and how they use morality laws specifically to target the minorities. Jordan, you cannot be criminalized based on your sexual orientation and gender identity. And that has created a problem specifically. I know I'm diverting a little bit from the conversation, but this has created a problem for asylum seekers who are in danger and living abroad, who are applying to be a refugee, and they're often faced by, but Jordan does not target LGBT people. It's not criminalized there. You actually have a publication that is very much known. I feel like it's often used in that manner to not denounce, but maybe reject. But I feel like these laws are often commonly used around the region.
I see, yes.
And Jordan's no exception.
Yeah, no, there.
Yep.
Yes. So, but I guess that leads me to another question, which is the question about language, because I think that when you first started, correct me if I'm wrong, you were publishing just in English, right?
Correct.
And then can you sort of tell us about the choice, you know, originally English, and then at which point you decided to also publish in Arabic, and what happened when you did that?
So when I started the publication, the English was a very natural language I used, because in Jordan, or in the capital where I live, specifically in the environment or the bubble, let's say, because we do live in bubbles, right? In the bubble that I do exist in at the time, Arabizi, we call it Arabizi, which is a mix between Arabic and English, which is a very capitalized language. It was very natural for me to use it, but then as we progressed in the publication, we started to realize that whenever we are in the, the centerfold of the media, or there's like some kind of controversy, we were soon dismissed because we speak in English, or the publication is English, so people did not assume that it's in Arabic. So they dismissed it quickly, and that protected us for a while. But then we started to realize the gap, whether in language, Arabic versus English, or the cultural language, or the social languages that we were speaking to the audience, was not really apparent in the publication. We were not targeting the right issues. We're not answering the right questions. We're not as reachable as we want to be. We were like circulating around the same people. We were like merely scratching the surface. But then it progressed into Arabic by coincidence. Actually, not by coincidence. I think, I believe, we were, there was like an interview that I conducted with Egypt Independent, if I'm not mistaken, in 2015. And I think throughout the interview, I was asked a question about whether we were thinking of publishing ever in Arabic. And I said, yes, one day, who knows, maybe next year. And then the title was LGBT publication in Jordan goes Arabic soon. And then the reaction was very positive from the followers and the readers. They were like, finally, or comments like, it's time, it's about time. I can't wait to look for, looking forward to it, and all of that. And I felt, okay, there's a need. We're like missing the point here. We're not realizing all of this focus towards language, and and having all of the issues that I mentioned before. The gap in all of these conversations.
Yes.
And then we launched the Arabic.
Yeah. But that also, I mean, obviously, launching in Arabic, having an issue in Arabic means that you have a much greater readership. And I guess, aside from what you already pointed out, the sort of difference between urban centers and capitals, because I mean, I guess Jordan is not unique in that. I mean, no country, you can't equate the country with the capitals. But there's also the issue of class, right? So there's only a certain class of people who would have access to English. So when you do that, you open it up to much larger readership, including people who I guess not so privileged, but you also open it up to people who might be less sympathetic and might actually, be quite critical. So did that happen? When you first published in Arabic, did you get specific reactions to the first Arabic issues?
We absolutely did. I'm not gonna lie. We anticipated it, but the way that it was pushed, it was basically, I believe it was, I don't know how to, like, I missed the word that I wanted to use, but it was like a whole debacle about how we were portrayed. There was a lot of rumors about us being licensed and registered in Jordan. We did an interview with a very popular alternative media talking about the launch, and then that sort of was taken out of proportion by medias that are not very credible, not resourced, and they would use like very problematic titles to gain clickbaiting, basically clickbait based medias. And then when there was a lot of fingers towards the government and the Media Commission about having any kind of formal recognition to the publication, whether it's licensed, registered, or even print. The Media Commission, or the principal at the time, had to respond saying, we checked our systems, this publication does not exist. If there's any kind of existence towards any kind of print towards this publication, there will be legal lawsuits and all of that. And then they also denounced, saying that please, we recommend everybody that they come to us and to fact check before they print and publish anything. So whenever the Media Commission had recognized that everything was non-factual, they blocked the publication at the same year, and we were not sent any kind of formal letter saying we were censored, or any sort of kind of formal a formal approach to the whole situation. And then we had to also respond saying we are not registered or licensed, we never was, we would never want to be. etc., etc., etc. So that's how the situation was like blown out of proportion. And the articles that we published were not very gullible. I would say the articles, the articles we published with the first Arabic issues were a little bit controversial as well. Were not easy.
Yeah. I want to go to the content in a moment. But yeah, so I don't know if you can just sort of clarify for me, because I mean, I've been sort of following sort of debates around, legal issues around NGOs. Should you register as an NGO or not in different countries in the region? But so what does that actually mean if you say, no, we're not registered, we're not, what was the other word you used?
Licensed,
yes. Yeah. So does that, but that allows you still to go online? I mean, so how does that work?
So the internet has many ways for you to publish your content. At the end of the day, at the time, there was a lot of problems towards freedom of speech towards Jordan and conversations towards it. And it was very near a lot of events similar to this event. And I believe that the Western media was trying to pin Jordan as one of those countries that are, against freedom of speech. Not that I'm saying that it is amazing in freedom of speech, but I didn't want to participate in that conversation using Western media as a tool. I was very conscious about that since we are living in this country. So I was trying to find other formats of or mediums to publish and to work. So we chose not to speak about that at the censorship at the beginning, but next year, a parliament member chose to pin herself as the person, as credit, to take the credit for censoring the publication upon article called Article 49. And the article basically says if you are a polling station, if you talk about the internal or external affairs of the country, then you have to obtain a license. And we don't do any of those things. We don't go under this kind of rule. So this kind of formalization. Licensing and registering, I'm talking within specifically in Jordan, that means that you are monitored by the government. And if they choose to write about a topic that they do not approve of, then they have the authority to tell you can remove that article. And then there's also the issue of self-censorship. And there's also, whenever you want to register or license, you have to have a space. So that means if I have a studio or a space for the publication, that means the government has to know about it. And I felt like that is very threatening in how all of this is connected.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I would imagine that, aside from having to deal with these outward forces, the state, and also, I guess, sort of conservative constituencies within society, whether in Jordan or transnationally, I guess I would imagine that sort of the main barrier would be self-censorship, and to decide, what do we publish, what don't we publish, and how do we write about it. So can you tell us a little bit about content in terms of, the kinds of issues the magazine covers and how you choose topics? And I guess also, so how do you deal with this dilemma or challenge of self-censorship?
We try as much as possible not to apply self-censorship, since this is one of the issues that I feel like the media is facing locally and regionally when it, in the respective environments. So I believe we don't try to apply that as much as possible. If there's something that we feel like could be misunderstood, we try to highlight it as much as possible in a with either a trigger warning or saying this contains explicit content, whether visually or in a written form. So all of these things, in terms of choosing our own topics, I believe they're very based on conversations that are very connected to the community, to the regional community. So one of the recent topics that we are picking specifically for the next issue, the upcoming issue, is about hair. Whether the hair on your head, whether the hair on your body, and our relationships with it. It's a very personal issue, and I believe a lot of these themes that we pick are very inspired, as much as I said before, by conversations within the community, maybe the news, things that we have read, certain words, exhibitions that we visit. I feel like all of these conversations appear, and I feel like it's we pick them based on connectability. So what we do is we basically create a structure and we share it with our audience, and we tell them, if you would like to apply, this is some of the angles that we have chosen for you to be inspired by, to broaden their horizon. Because many people think when they think of hair, they think of very certain, very framed ways of thinking. So we're trying to actually push them to think of hair in a very, as you said, transnationally, or in a very different ways, or and then they submit their concept notes, and then the core team goes through these concept notes, and we try to see which ones fit best with the publication and how we can move forward from previous content that we have published before, and it's not redundant or repetitive in that way. And that's what I meant by we outsource a lot,
right?
Because it keeps the publication fresh. It keeps it, there's new blood into the publication. It's a community-based publication. So that's how me as part of the team, create the process for creating the content that we do.
Yes, I guess I want to go back to that process, but maybe sort of first, so when you speak about the community and also, the readership, I mean, who is actually reading My.Kali? Do you have any sense? I mean, it's of course very difficult given that it's an, online publication, but I guess you would get a sense because you get some feedback, some reactions.
Absolutely. I believe as an editor, the people who follow Maikali are people who are interested in SOGI-related issues, sexual orientation and gender identity issues. People who are interested in the alternative arts, because we do cover a lot about emerging artists and alternative arts. Maybe a lot of people who are studying, they would like to use the publication as a reference, as a resource, as part of their research, as part of their report. And also, I believe it's many people who want to find connecting and to find themselves in the content that we publish. Many people within the queer community, they feel alone constantly. It's one of the feelings I personally grew up with. Felt like I was the only queer person in Jordan, and that was one of the motives why this publication was also created, is because I wanted people to feel less and less alone. So I feel that people are trying to connect with other people, see themselves in the publication, the content, and also to dream, to be inspired, because I feel like we do work with dreamers and people who are inspire conversations and dialogues. And even when we talk visually rather than written, many people dream through images and photography. And I feel like this is one of the aspects of the publication that we try to share with the audience. Sorry if I talk a lot.
No, that's fine. Absolutely fine. Just also maybe before I ask the next question, I'd like to again encourage the audience, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the Q&A function. So, okay, I had several questions now, but I guess let me first go to the there's sort of this big conceptual political question, or like body of issues that I like to talk with you about, because so as I said in the beginning, this conversation today is part of a series of conversations I've had in the sort of under the label of queering the Middle East. And I noticed that the magazine is sort of self-identified as intersectional, queer, and feminist. And sometimes I see sort of queer feminist put together. And to my mind, that was really, really significant, given the specific political connotations that I at least associate with intersectional queer feminism. As opposed to, I guess, a more sort of liberal, rights-based visibility LGBT approach. And I mean, having been involved with Kohel, Journal of Body and Gender Research, as an advisory board member for many years, I've witnessed quite sort of close by the tensions that exist not only, of course, in the region, but I guess sort of globally, often between these more sort of liberal LGBT approaches, frameworks, and mobilizations and organizations, and then sort of queer intersectional feminism or intersectional queer feminism. And so I, was very sort of interested how you got to where you are in terms of this intersectional queer feminism, and how do you position Maikali within these debates and tensions?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the issues that we faced when we discussed the LGBT issues are they're very centralized around LGBT issues. They're very distilled from other social or socioeconomical situations that are happening in the region or in certain countries. And we realized we cannot progress as civilians, as human beings, as people, if we are very centralized around our own problems. I feel like our problems are very shared, are very, as we say, intersectional in that way. Women or LGBT people, we both face patriarchal societies led by men that are very dominant in their ways about how we view things. And I feel we cannot approach these two topics separately. I believe fighting for this is also fighting for this, is also fighting for this. And I believe these are the topics that were also very much put on the table by the community. These are the topics, these are the views of the current community, because this is what, we publish what the community is writing, what the community is feeling, what the community is viewing the new world or the new conversations when we discuss queer issues. So we do not detach ourselves from these conversations, specifically intersectional conversations. So this is like one of the main, that's when the publication have moved from being exclusively LGBT to become a regional queer feminist intersectional publication. And fighting for this means that you're fighting for this, that means you're fighting for this as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So if you don't mind, let me sort of push you a bit on that, because so when you speak about the community, I mean, without wanting to sort of mischaracterize or misrepresent, but I guess, for me, I always have sort of my antenna up when I hear the community, because I would think that whether it is the community that you're talking about or any other community, is probably not homogeneous and doesn't speak in one voice, and there will be frictions and tensions and struggles. And so I guess, so how, I mean, because I would think that the community that you're referring to is on the continuum more, of, I guess, people who would identify more with a kind of, liberal rights-based LGBT approach and a focus on sexuality and potentially identity politics. And then those on the other side who, really, really are strongly objecting to this and, are very much committed to intersectional politics. So I guess, how do you position yourself and how do you straddle that? And and how do you see the community from that angle?
I believe like a lot of for instance, a lot of the demonstrations led by queer feminist movements, specifically, for instance, Tunis, Palestine, and Lebanon, they were very intersectional in their approach towards the revolutions or their demonstrations. You can see visibly queer people marching with women. You can see women specifically who might be cis or heteronormative marching with queer people in these countries in terms of these conversations. And I believe a lot of these conversations do exist in the activist and the feminist community. As a person who is involved personally in these environments, I feel like these conversations are never detached from how we are approaching these conversations. Again, fighting for this means fighting for that. You cannot detach both issues in these topics.
No, I mean, I agree. Riva, Saik, and myself have written a little bit about sort of the various tensions on the one hand between, I guess, feminism and LGBTQ activism, and then LGBT and queer feminist activism. And, you know, when I was reflecting on the sort of history of the relationship between feminism in the region and more broadly queer activism, I mean, I do remember when I was doing research on the Egyptian feminist movement in the 90s, and I was living in Cairo, that was a time when a movement that was already very much constantly under accusation of imitating the West would shy away from expressing solidarity with queer people. I'm thinking particularly here, the Queen Boat affair, but, you know, more broadly. And that was kind of, you know, you're already so much under, you know, pressure. Or, I mean, when I think in Iraq today, you know, it's also really, really difficult. But then I see this new generation of, you know, feminist activists, you know, who are so much more tuned in to also challenging heteronormativity while challenging patriarchy. And so I really see a shift. And yes, I mean, I do think, like, as you say, like the queer feminists in the region, particularly, you know, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Turkey, they are the ones who are at the forefront of challenging authoritarianism and sectarianism and militarism and all the, you know, other big issues. And so I think that's, yeah, quite interesting. So I was wondering, so you mentioned already, so you now work as a team. So initially you worked alone, but now you have a team that is working on Maikali.
I wanted to go a little bit back about what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to ask you a question about
Yes.
how you, what are usually the tensions that are basically brought up in conversations between feminists and the queer movement specifically. What are the questions or usually the challenges that are faced in these conversations in between?
Right. No, so I was, so the, you know, when I was talking about the tensions that I'm aware of through my experience of working with Kohel, so this is really very recently. So Kohel, which is this online journal that's also published in English, and I know you know, but just for the audience, that's also published in English and Arabic, and it's yeah, it's also a queer feminist intersectional journal. And so in that context, I have come across these tensions between not the feminist movement and the queer movement so much, but between queer feminists and I guess, yeah, LGBT activism. And so the latter, LGBT activism, often kind of male dominated, actually cis male dominated, and often kind of yeah, liberal rights based and not very intersectional. And so I think that tension has been most evident to my mind in Lebanon and in Palestine, I guess. But and then I was referring to the tensions that I knew previously, that was in the 90s, when I don't think it was much of a tension, because I don't think there was much of a open LGBT movement. It was just that many feminists themselves were complicit in reproducing heteronormativity and even in some contexts homophobia. And I think that sometimes it was not necessarily because they were actually homophobic, although I don't know, but often it was like a political strategy because they already felt so much under attack of imitating the West. So I feel that's a big shift from, you know, like the 90s to know that the younger generation seems to be much more confident.
Thank you for that.
So I will have a question from the audience, but just maybe you said now you're working in a team. You have already kind of said, and you're outsourcing, right? It really has shifted from just working on it yourself, right?
Yes, correct. We have a list of recurrent or loyal writers that we work with whenever we have a specific topics we would like to commission writers to write about. But there's also outsourcing, because I believe even if we have a vision about viewing certain topics, I believe this publication should not be far or removed from on-ground conversations in the queer street. And how they would like to define whether they're documenting their own stories. So yes, I believe we have a core team that we work with. I do not work on this alone, of course. It can't be. It's not possible. And there's also outsourcing and having these conversations. And we connect many. For instance, like we had a couple of times where whenever we have people sending their concept notes for articles or angles or things what they want to write about, and we find similarities, and maybe we try to connect both of these writers who have no idea about one another, and to try to bring something new to the table in a very emerged way, of course consensually, if they both agreed. And sometimes we connect the artist or the photographer with the writer to create the body of work, so it can be seen from a 360 angle, or like a different angle, so visually and content wise. So there's different dynamics about how we create the issue. Sometimes it progresses alone. Sometimes they suggest how they would like to structure the publication or the content.
Yeah. Thank you, Khalid. So I have a few more questions, but let me turn to the audience now. So
absolutely.
Abba Youssef is asking, can you speak to some of the safety issues that the publication faced or faces, and how is that navigated? And a follow-up, what advice would you give to folks in other Arab countries like Egypt or Iraq who might be inspired by your work and want to implement something similar?
So this is a very valid question. Thank you so much, Hiba, for that. Some of the security issues we faced was public outing. Some of us as core team members, we were publicly outed. We did not think of the consequences. I believe one of the things that I could give advice about, if someone wants to start their own publication, which is absolutely amazing if you are thinking about that, or someone else is thinking about that. But the only concern I would have is pinning it to a country. I believe when you pin it to a country, you cause some type of a threat that is very localized. I think when you do not pin it to a country, that gives it much more distribution, and that also gives it it brings you much more safety, because you're not targeted by people who are searching for queer people or whoever is writing these content. So I feel like when you do not localize it specifically, then it's more relatable, more reachable, and also it protects you as a person who's publishing these things. Also, one of the things that we realized is that we created a plan, like we would create hypothetical situations, like if we were sitting in a place and the government or authority have barged in, what would we say? How would we react? How do we evacuate the place? What would we say? How would we, we share a common story? So sometimes, authorities separate you and they try to pin you against each other, or they ask you different questions. So you want to make sure that you're answering different questions. I'm going extreme, but what I'm trying to tell you is that thinking of a plan B, a hypothetical situation, helps for you to do that. Seeking this advice helps, because you are reaching out for advice about these situations, and I believe that's it. I mean, we can delve deeply into that, but I believe we were faced by many safety alarming situations. We were, we were threatened by death constantly, but we try as much as possible not to think about these issues. This is a risk we chose to take, and we believe it's a fundamental value for us, and it's a purpose. So you also want to pick your battles, where you want to fight and how you want to fight it.
Yeah. Yes, good point. So I was wondering if you can, you gave some examples already, but can you tell us about some of the recent articles you published in My.Kali. What were they about?
Absolutely. I realize I use the word absolutely a lot as well. One of the recent topics we have published is called Men in Oriental Dance, Challenging the Gendering of the Body and the Movement. It's a beautiful article written by Cynthia Darian, who is a dancer and an academic and a researcher. And she wrote her piece specifically on belly dancing among men, and basically how men also practice this specific dance, which is belly dancing, and the aura of judgment and allure, or even disgust that lingers around men who do belly dancing as if they were committing some sort of a crime or a shocking moral transgression. And it's a beautiful piece that I do suggest for you to read it, because it's a big reference, it's a big resource. And we use like one of the scenes from a film from the early 50s from, I like to call it Queer Egypt, where you can see obviously a male belly dancing around other men. Another piece that I also love was conducted by Bahraini journalist Naziha Saeed, and she conducted an interview, a feature on Saudi artist called Rutana. The article is called Rutana, on our erotic lives as a prayer, healing, and a call for freedom, of freedom. And basically the interview delves into her IGTV show, sorry for my language, Fucked and Blessed, in which she talks about body, sex, and sexuality and everything in between. And I'm not apologizing for the name of the show. I absolutely think that she can own it, and I love that. And that's like one of some of the two recent features that we have published, that advise people for them to check, and to check the references and resources used for these articles.
Yeah. Great. So I noticed that one of the articles you published a while back was about queers in the Iraqi Revolution. I think the article is called Sexual Diversity in the Iraqi Revolution Angers the Authority. Now, being half Iraqi myself and having worked on gender issues in Iraq, I'm very interested. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the content of the article.
I love this article so much because it's not specifically, I mean, yes, it is, of course, it does talk about Iraq as a case study here, but I believe it's used by, it's applied in many of our countries. The article specifically is written by researcher, writer, and our Arabic editor, one of our Arabic editors, Musa al-Shadidi. And the article delved into how during the revolution, the Iraqi revolutions in the late 2019, when how the authorities debunked or dismissed the revolution as the revolution of perverts and homosexuals and prostitutes, basically. And it begins, you know, the article begins the task of documenting the spectrum of a sexual orientation that was present during the Iraq Revolution, the sexual charges that leveled up by the political class against revolution, which it cites. And how some of these individuals responded to these charges. And I think it's a very interesting article about how our governments use homosexuality and how they politicize it in that manner.
Yeah.
I
I
advise people to go check that out.
Yes, absolutely. I'll definitely look at it carefully.
If the website is not censored in your country.
Yes. Yes. So a question by Halima Aslam. How do you envision the future of Maikali? Also, do you think it's possible for your work to spread in non-Arab countries such as Pakistan, India, etc.?
I love her question, because we had an issue last year that basically discussed the future. We call it Inshallah Bukra, hopefully tomorrow, because we were amid the COVID. We didn't know what we were approaching. We did not know how to envision the future, because we all knew that the COVID will change the discourse and how we are entering a new world and how we are going to see the digital space as the new space. I believe things are getting a little bit back to normal in that sense, but it was a very beautiful way of utilizing the digital world in that manner. We we definitely feel like we are, our conversations are reaching other countries such as Pakistan and India. We have done an interview with the people of Conflictarium in India, and basically it's a conceptual museum that is India. It's also very queer and very feminist and intersectional. And we have interviewed how they use a conceptual museum to document the stories of the queer community in India. Another recent article that we have published was by Naziha Saeed, a Bahraini journalist, that wrote about the queer community after Taliban have returned or is ruling now, and the documenting of the queer local and the diaspora activists, the queer activists in Pakistan. So I also advise you to read that article. I can't remember if it's translated into English, but definitely, you know, top priority articles such as that will be translated into English. If it's not, I can't remember, but I know it exists in Arabic, and definitely we will be delving into these issues more and more. We don't see it far from our scope of interest, I would say. Thank you for your question, Halima.
A question by Hanadi Al-Saman. So first of all, thanks for your conversation. You mentioned public outing as a security risk. How do you feel about global NGOs forcing people to come out?
That's a very strong question. We published an article called Globalizing the Closet. I also advise you to check that article. And basically, it's a conversation between me and another feminist, an activist in Jordan, about how she thinks, I think I changed my mind now. It's because this article was in a couple of years ago, and how it wasn't, I think I was saying how important it was and how other people were saying, I don't think it's important. But if I want to relate it to my personal life, I realize when I don't label things as a queer person, I feel much more liberated rather than just label myself as a human, basically, if I box myself in that sense. There was a question mark about also the Human Rights Watch campaign, No Longer Alone, and how it was pinned as a coming out video to many people, which I also disagree about how that video specifically was viewed. I don't think I personally believe, I don't think it's a need to come out. I think it's not part of the conversation at the moment. It's not part of someone's priorities. Many people are denied acceptance, denied recognition, that alone coming out of the closet. I absolutely denounce if there's any NGOs pushing people to come out. I don't think that's an aspect in any way. And I think it's an old-fashioned way. I don't think people come out. I mean, I don't want to, I mean, even in the Western world, Kirsten Stewart, if I'm not mistaken, is queer herself, and she married her girlfriend, but she never came out publicly saying, hi, I'm queer. It's not like I'm on the cover of People magazine announcing my coming out. You know, people are living their life normally when it comes to these conversations. But I will go back to this article that I mentioned, Globalizing the Closet, which specifically discusses the Western concept of coming out versus how people in our region specifically view coming out. And thank you for your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's particularly, I'm thinking now, immediately what comes to mind are some of the articles written, again, mainly I would say by Lebanese queer feminists who really challenged this dichotomy between, you know, coming out and being in the closet. And I think that actually, in terms of knowledge production, we've seen that queer feminist activists and researchers have really challenged some of these dichotomies through their writing, have written really very creatively and originally about shame, you know, and what that means, and community as well, the significance of community. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, that resonates a lot.
Very much so. Growing up, I did not know the words either gay or queer or even the word coming out. I believe when I told my mom, I told her about emotions that I have for another man, not knowing what that actually meant at the age of 14 or 13. And And that conversation led us to have another conversation about father figure and how I can exist, and how she also rationalized my emotion towards other men. But also the experience of being publicly outed, which was, I personally was publicly outed. I never chose to come out. Actually, it was I was put under the circumstances to deal with it, and I feel like I have shelved many things to deal with coming out specifically, rather than going. I didn't go through coming in terms of my own identity alone. I felt like that was like a common conversation in my country. That definitely pushed conversations into questioning the closet. Is it important? Labeling and delabeling, and how all of this is constructed in a very categorized way, as we learn more and more about colonial theory, and how that is very also connected to colonialism, and how that was also imposed on us as queer people living in the region.
Yeah, it's very complicated, isn't it? I mean, the way that I don't want to go into the Joseph Massad debate, but on the one side, recognizing, of course, the impact of colonialism without romanticizing the pre-colonial area where everything was fluid and wonderful. I mean, that's really tricky. And while
Yes,
also recognizing, there is something called the Gay International, but without then totally taking away agency and will and choice from people in the region.
I agree with you on a lot of levels. I think there's takeaways from each conversation. Maybe his theory was not really applicable in many ways, and romanticizing pre-colonial times is also a problematic way, definitely, to see things.
Well, I have many more questions, but I think we have unfortunately run out of time. Really grateful, Khalid, for you to spend time today and being in conversation. I hope that those of you who have listened to us today, or will listen later once we circulate the recording of the event, will be looking at Maikali and will be looking for the range of very interesting articles. I certainly, will add a few to my reading list on my courses.
One of the articles that I really love in the publication is called Screens and Streets. And basically we took the singer and artist, Egyptian singer and artist called Ruby. I don't know if many of you know her, but it was a conversation about how female sexuality was used in the Arab pop culture in relation to how many people were connecting to the early progressing conservative Egypt. I don't know why I randomly mentioned this article, because I felt like we were talking about content and all of that. And I feel like I always go back to that content, that article.
I will check it out. And I'm teaching currently this course on gender and sexuality in the Middle East, and I can just see how this would fit really perfectly. But so many thanks, Khalid, and good luck. Good luck with publishing Maikali. Good luck with your aspirations going forward.
Thank you so much for having me, and for your time, and for your questions, and for this amazing and lovely conversation. And I hope we stay in touch in any ways. And I also urge many people to follow the publication on its various social media for upcoming issues and content.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.